much, and thank you folks for joining us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself in a minute, but I always want to really rave about the Do Space project. I work with libraries and higher ed all over the United States, and there's really nothing like it. So I always like to give them credit. This is a community technology library dedicated to empowering our community through access to technology and innovative learning experience. And I have to say that it's a pleasure to work with them. So my name's Pat Wagner, and I've been a trainer and consultant, again, for libraries, higher ed, and allied organizations since 1978. And before that, I was a graphic designer. I had worked in book design, worked in journalism, made my life living as a printer, even had a graphic art studio with 3 incredibly talented people working for me. And yes, I love color and I like typography and I love cute kitten or ferret photos for sure. But I want to reassure you that first of all, I can't draw worth a darn. I'm really actually not an artist. I know how to manipulate elements. And for the program today, as we'll say in a minute, we are assuming this is for people who know nothing, who have no background in design, and you have no money and you have no time, but you're still expected to use images within the online programs that you work on. And just to give you an idea of what my life is, I produced 17 webinars just this month on a range of topics, both for our company, Pattern Research, and both with training partners around the United States as well. So I practice what I preach. This is not theoretical. And I want to give credit right away to pixabay.com. All the images that you're going to be seeing today, except one that was taken by my dad many years ago, are from Pixabay, which is European-based. It is free photos and images put into the public domain. You don't even have to offer a credit for them. And there's hundreds of thousands of them, and we support them, and we hope that you do too. So the key idea today, and every program I do has a key idea, is that when you're looking at images, and we're going to be particularly talking about photos today, we want you to look for the story. And that's why I say that the program that I'm doing is very much influenced by the photojournalist model. And look for the story and how to engage people in the story. And it's okay, by the way, to have things that are just pretty, that are ornamental or decorative. I have no problem with that. And I have a couple of examples of ones that I just love that I put in here. But for most of what we do, we look for a story to complement what we're trying to communicate to our reader or viewer here. And we start by thinking about comparing what we're looking at to other similar ideas and kind of training our eye to decide which is the better story. So we have 2 stories here of 2 kittens from the same litter, and one kitten is looking cautious and the other one, it looks like it's going to pounce. Both of them might have an absolute good place in a story that you're trying to tell, and you're going to have to decide which is the better image and which is the better story. And I'll say just right up front, the best way I know to do it is through experience, is to inundating yourself with the best images you can. Now, in the olden days before electricity, when I was growing up, every single household, I think in America, got Look magazine and Like magazine and had the best photographers in the world contributing to them. Also, everybody in the world, I think, also had a subscription to the National Geographic, which also had the best folks in the world. So the images that we see oftentimes on television or even online, I'm sorry, but they're just sometimes not up to that quality. So finding places that you can educate yourself is simply a meaning of looking with intent and really thinking, what's the difference between these 2 images and which would be the best one to use for the particular purpose I have today. Now, everything we do is subjective when we talk about art and design. There are some rules that seem to work better most of the time with most people in most circumstances, but you're very much stuck with my aesthetic today, which includes my favorite photo of all time of me and my big sister. And it was one that my dad took, and it hasn't been cropped. This is the photo. And I think my dad did an incredible job taking that photo of his daughter. So yes, I'm a little sentimental, and that's just something you're going to have to put up with me today. Another part of subjectivity, and this is very important, of knowing your audience. This is true of anything we do in commercial art, whether it's uh, doing a painting for a lobby, designing a new building. No matter what we do, it's subjective. So if I put this photo up, I grew up in Chicago. This is an iconic photo of the bridges across the Chicago River in downtown Chicago. And it's a lovely photo, but it means a lot to me, partly because I have walked over those bridges many times, usually either holding the hand of my mom or walking with my husband in the last 40 years as we've gone to national conferences. It means a lot to me because the building to the right that looks like a giant corn cob is Marina City, and I went to grade school with the kid whose father built it and mother named it. So there's a lot of subtext when I look at something like this, but that might not mean anything to the audience that I want to devote myself to. So I need to think about subjectivity, and this is a picture of the Flatiron Building in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm sure that most of you who are seeing this program are familiar with it. It was designed by George Prinz. It was originally a building that was supposed to be kind of a homage to the Flatiron Building in New York, and it's gone through a number of different stages. It's been a hotel, it's been an office building, now it's got some offices, and I understand a really nice restaurant. Next time I come to Omaha, I'll have to visit it. This will mean more to that particular audience. So this is where, when I do programs for specific agencies and institutions around the United States and Canada, I find out about who the people are that I'm going to be addressing. And this is important to me, I was able to do a keynote for a state agency in Louisiana a few years ago. And so I'm up there in front of the audience with the big screen, and we had a lot of art and photos. It was about the future of libraries. And a number of people came up to me and said it meant so much to them that I went and found photos that were about Louisiana, animals and landscapes and building and people and ideas. And they said, the fact that you took that extra time to think about us made a big difference, and psychologically, of course, improved my credibility with the audience. This is one of the reasons, and you'll hear me say it more than once, I don't like necessarily canned templates, and I don't like what we call corporate art. That could be anywhere in the world, and that's nice. And if by chance I was doing a program for corporate people who were in some weird gray building in the middle of nowhere, they might say, "Oh, Pat, you really caught our ethos. Thank you so much." But you know what? These ain't the people I'm usually doing things for. So I want something that, if possible, engages my audience personally, even if I'm presenting to hundreds of people. And yes, a little brag here, one of the webinars I did this year, 2,400 people registered. And so 1,000 got to see it live, and another 1,400 got to have the webinar. And I thought a lot about how do I engage those people, and there were people from all over the world. So I think that little step is enough to make a big difference in how people see your work as well. So again, my assumption is you have no time, you have no money, you have no training, you have no fancy software. And if you do have fancy software, you have no idea of how to use it. Everything that I'm doing in this program for you today are things that come right off of whatever tools are available in the PowerPoint program on the Mac. I'm an Apple user, and nothing else, because I wanted to show you you can do some cool things. And except for that painfully adorable photo of me and my sister, everything else comes out of Pixabay for free. Now, this particular image that I used, I wanted to use something that had to do with simple. I was looking for, in terms of art, I was looking for images that had to do with, say, crayons, or chalk, or pencils, or finger painting. Wanted to do something simple. And I saw this photo and I loved it because I really like the do space logo, and I wanted something that complemented that very strong kind of, and I say this in the best sense, clunky logo that you see in the lower left-hand corner. And the palette I use, the colors I use for the type are all pulled from that particular logo as well. And so that's why I picked this sidewalk chalk, because it kind of matched the boldness. It's kind of fun. It's kind of pretty. It's kind of like, wow, right? And as I talk over it, I give people a message about it. So that's why I chose that particular piece of art to talk about this issue. So everybody has outcomes, I have outcomes. One is that you're going to, I hope, feel a little more confident that you're going to be able to pick images that really kind of hook your people, whether you're doing a webinar, putting them in your blog. And there will be a little bit of an emphasis on webinars, simply because probably the bulk of the work I do these days is working with online trainers, obviously because of the virus, but also because whether you're doing a blog or a website or anything, hopefully you're trying to sell something. You're trying to sell a message. You want people to take an action of some kind. You want them to think better of you, right? And also to show that you can make good photos a little better without having to buy an expensive set of tools or get I'm sorry, they're probably, the Adobe God is probably going to, strike the house with lightning, but you don't have to get a subscription to something that you find we bought it because we thought it was a good idea, but we never use it. Also, in this day and age, more so than ever before, people are justifiably concerned about the images they see and what this means. And I've been in the room more than once that me and somebody else, in putting together an online course or doing whatever, were the ones who raised our hand in the room and said, these are not photos that represent the diversity of our country or the people that we're talking to. In fact, for one project, and this is sort of a caveat, for one project I did for the University of North Texas a few years ago, which was a big deal because at the time the University of North Texas, which was the largest purveyor of online education in the state of Texas, which meant obviously in the surrounding 11 states, and none of the images they were using would be in any way, shape, or form thought of as diverse. And when I started trying to find diverse images, I couldn't. It's very hard. If you look up, like even now, if you look up something, images of people, 80 to 90% of them will be Caucasian and don't represent the diversity of the world. So we went out, folks, and we paid students to come in, and we made sure that the images that people saw represented the diversity of the campus. So we want to make sure that we do that, but also going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of using people faces. And you'll notice that there, except for my sister and me, I'm not using people in the program that I'm doing today. So what's the agenda? Okay, we're going to talk about the great webinar image debate. And this obviously also applies to blogs, applies to websites, it applies to online brochures and posters and advertisements as well. Some logistical issues, and I want to warn you in advance that I don't talk about what kind of software you should use because I don't know and I don't care. I want to keep it simple. And the second thing is that it used to be, in the olden days, 20 years ago, much more of a concern of what format a particular photo was in, if it was a GIF or a TIFF or a JPEG or a PDF, how it could be manipulated. That's not so much a concern today. The big concern is test out things before you have a deadline, meaning that I think one of the best ways to learn how to use technology to help you find and apply great images, photos, and illustrations is to play. Just play with it. So I have never run into a problem as long as I have given myself enough time to try. Oops, they don't take this anymore. Oh my goodness, they used to take this format, now they don't. Oh, I just don't really like the quality. Maybe I'll try another format, but I don't have a formula to give you. We're going to talk a little bit about this photojournalist model and what this means, and we're going to dive in a little bit to what a story is and what does it mean to use that story graphically. We're also going to take one not very good photo that I found and how 2 or 3 steps might make it into a little bit better photo, and just to illustrate what that goes. And then I did put together some nice resources for you. Couple of books, some websites, places not just to look at graphic design, but also to look at this whole idea of storytelling and how important it is in whatever that we do online. So I hope that you'll enjoy it. First thing is the great webinar debate, images or text. And we're in an era where I think the pendulum is starting to swing back a little bit, because I tend to go for content rich because most of what I do is education. Also, people have to oftentimes, very practical, take the slides, take the webinar, go back to their workplace and justify spending the time and sometimes money to take the webinar or do it so they can replicate it to their folks. There is a fairly strong group of people who say, oh, no, 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 you should just have images in what you do with no text and then just talk over the text. And that's a wonderful idea, except first of all, it's really hard to replicate this if the person doesn't remember what was being said. And I just talked to one of my training partners that's a national training organization out of Maryland, and they said that they have to school trainers who come in who just want a series of images. And frankly, sometimes the images are not very good. So this is, by the way, one of my favorite images, this old mosaic from of tile mosaic from hundreds of years ago. I liked this image so much that it became the inspiration of the new logo for our company. That's how much I liked it. And it's a pretty image, but it has to be in a context of some kind for it to make sense. So one thing to remember, if somebody tries to shame you into not finding your own balance between image and text that makes sense to your purpose, you need to remind them that all those fancy studies that they are quoting to you, most of them were done on a half a dozen college students so somebody could get their PhD. And every time that somebody has said, well, Pat, the blah, blah study says this or that, you know what I did? I would go search it down. And sure enough, I found a few dozen people, mostly in high school and college, that were tested on whatever. The thing is, I'm working mostly, my audience mostly is working adults over 25 who have jobs, families to take care of, a different context of what they need. And I'm always suspicious, having participated in some of these studies myself, that you have college students who are figuring out what to say based on, are they going to get a good grade eventually? You know, pocket money. Anyway, so there is a great debate out there, and the more you do in terms of using images, the more you're going to hear about that great debate. Now, another piece of good news is that sometimes you can't find the right photo. You can't find the right image, and you are on a deadline. So this is the good news. Good typography, good type, which now, one of the blessings of the 21st century, you can download for free, and it's really good, will create an image. The typography that I'm using for this particular program is called Open Sans, which means open is the kind of type, sans, S-A-N-S, is French for without, which means that it's what we call sans serif, kind of the block types without the little doohickeys, that's a technical term, on the edges of the type. So if you have nice type, that also can create an image. People forget that, as does color. So I think this is a nice slide, and it's kind of fun. It kind of ties in with the DoSpace logo, and I decided that, all things being equal, that the Open Sans was just a fine type style to use that's close enough who's going to notice about things. So remember, when in doubt, look at the type that you're using and seeing if you add a little color and place it nicely on the page. Maybe that's all you need for sure. So the thing about image versus content is, the way that I think of it is, the content what is said in the text and what is said in the narrative if you're doing a webinar, what is said in the words that I could find on your website or your blog or your online programs, whatever, is a structure. It's kind of like the road that you're traveling on that takes you from one place to another to another. And one of the images that actually helped us design our own website was the idea of an art gallery. And you've got one of those headphone things on that's talking about the different artists and giving you a narrative and giving you context, and you're walking along the wall and you're looking at different things, and you stand in front of each picture, and each picture tells you one piece of that story, one facet of the story as you walk along. So the text is the journey and the art is what keeps people engaged. This happens to be 3 images that most people who live where I do in Colorado would recognize very quickly. They would recognize aspen trees because that's one of the um, trees that we think of along with the blue spruce, trees of Colorado. So you show this to someone in Colorado and they say, oh, this is about the outdoors. Maybe this is about um, working in Colorado or places you might like to visit. Of course, the second site, the second one, definitely is something that people who live in Colorado can relate to: a mountain range, snow. This happens to be in late fall. And yes, just so you know, if you visit Colorado, yes, we do experience snowfall 12 months out of the year. The state police have had to rescue people from campsites who were snowed in on the 4th of July. And then, of course, Mesa Verde, the Mesa Verde National Park. So if you look at those images, it sort of is like a journey. And I love this idea of, we have an art gallery that we want to frame the art in, and we're going to tell you a story, and the art in the gallery is going to illustrate that story. Another example is you take one particular icon, and in this case, the dandelion, and trust me, Pixabay has a lot of great photos of dandelions, and then you have to say, now, how am I going to use this image? Is there some story about this? You know, I often find that the image of a dandelion or a weed coming out of a log or a sidewalk or something is an image of hope and rebirth, which is sort of fun. Sometimes just the absolute beauty and the symmetry of a, a picture of a dandelion is something that can have a lot of different meanings. It can be a meaning about unity. It can be a meaning about the world, to use the dandelion instead of a globe, right? There's all sorts of ways to use it. And by the way, this was originally a picture that was just black and white, which was fine, but using the tools on from PowerPoint just gave it a little bit of a tinge. Or there may be something dramatic that you're trying to say, right? About things dissolving, maybe a dramatic about change. And definitely the third photo has a lot to do with change. And all I had to do was to crop it. It already came with that lovely sort of interesting color palette and the intensity and those little pieces of seeds that were falling away about it. So again, one kind of image can have a lot of different meanings within a context. And one of the things that we want to think about are the photos that you're including or the images you're including. Do they help people remember the story that you're trying to tell? And so there's a lot of ways to take similar images and make them do different things for you, which is nice. If you are trying to teach people something, if you want them to take action, if you want them to change their mind about something, if you're trying to sell an idea, if you want something from people, I think it's interesting to consider what we call the gold standard. And this, by the way, is just colored tin foil. This is just basically gold foil, again, a Pixabay image, and all I had to do was drop it in, didn't have to do anything to it. And then what I did was find a little bit of color using, again, the tools that I have on my Mac that are just inherent in PowerPoint, didn't have to do anything fancy, and found myself a goal that was pretty close. And again, using the pretty blue that is part of the do space image. And the three ideas that I'd like you to think about, and this is often called the gold standard in education, is for people to retain the information, for you to inspire them to take some sort of action, and they actually take the action. So even though this model comes out of education, it's applicable to most of the things you're going to be doing online. So if you are thinking about that, you want to make sure that the images you use don't override the message. They've done stories about interviewing people and surveying people watching television commercials. And there are TV commercials out there that have won awards, but when they actually interview people, they say, oh yeah, I remember the image, but I don't remember the product it was attached to. And no, it has not inspired me to buy anything else. A couple of exceptions from old times is the wonderful VW ads when the VW Beetle was first introduced, and they had these wonderful things, self-deprecating humor about it being ugly and stuff. Oh, they sold millions of Beetles. I owned one. And then also the old Alka-Seltzer commercials where they said plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Well, the thing was that in the beginning, you only needed to put in one pill for stomach upset. And they got this famous lady in advertising. She said, no, it should be two pills, plop, plop, whiz, whiz. And they did that and sales skyrocketed. But you know what? That's the exception for a lot of, quote, clever ads. So we want to make sure that whatever the art that we have doesn't overwhelm the message, so they don't take the action that you want them to take. Here are some ideas about how to match photos and art of different kinds to the message. In your content, you want to have theories, facts, examples, and stories. So you want to have whatever abstract you're trying to say. I see a lot of blogs these days that are editorials, and I think that's good. I like to have a marketplace of ideas with lots of different ideas out there. I really hope that you, in some way, kind of back up what you're saying with facts that can be verified, you know, links to studies and so on. Maybe you have some examples that people can use, and stories as well. People love stories. I came from a family of storytellers. And I would say there's 15% of the people who, in the stories I tell and also the kind of photojournalistic art I use in many of my programs, they hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, and write long monologues on evaluations. But you know what? 80 to 85% of people really like it. And they remember the stories. And if there's an image with the story, that just makes it that much better. They want the text and the image to mean something together. So I'm always thinking about how does this image, again, if it had a caption on it, how would it support and underline what it was I was trying to say. We don't get into much of this, but what you say and how you say it, of course, is very important. And then also the interaction, including having people think about things and have assignments. And in this case, being able to offer you a chance to ask questions. And again, I don't charge for email or phone consultations, so you're more than welcome to come and contact me at Pattern Research in Denver, easy to find. And mind exercises like what if, which we're going to do in a minute. So what do I mean when I say the photojournalist model, which is really the storytelling model when it comes to art and photos? When I say this is the photojournalist model, and I'm talking about the story, what does this array of tools, and by the way, the tools that I'm seeing here, most of them are industrial age tools going back to the 18th and 19th century. I don't see anything particularly modern here. So what does this image say to you? Well, One reason I picked it because I thought it was interesting, you know, just aesthetically interesting, interesting colors, a nice palette of colors and so on, nice rhythm to it, whatever. But also it was like, what I am trying to talk about is the tools you can use to improve what you do. So it's all about tools and their impact on people, even if it's just how you think about things. So one thing you can do is if you're looking for um, photos and you have the time and you have people you can do that, and let's say it's like in this case you have a photo and a caption, photo and a caption, okay, come up with 3 or 4 different ideas like we did with the kittens. It's good not to do 7 or 10 or 20 unless the people you're working with are really very experienced at looking at art, okay? 3 to 5 is always better. 3 is the best. So that people can say, does this make sense to you? So yes, I had several things in mind. I had this one together. I showed it to my husband and my husband went, wow, right? And when he started talking about it, I felt, yeah, he got the message I was trying to give. It's never the fault of the viewer if they don't get the message you're trying to get. But when they do, isn't that nice? It's really nice. So let's pause a minute, and I want to talk about some logistical issues. I think the hardest thing, particularly if you don't make your living doing this, or if you're not part of a larger institution like a company or a university, it's so easy to make expensive copyright mistakes. And you can't assume just because your next door neighbor or the person at the next desk told you it was okay, that it was okay to use a particular image, or to assume because you see that image a lot, it's in the public domain. We are really, really careful here at our office and have been for years that we use things in the public domain. However, this is a sad story, but we had found a couple of great images on the Flickr site. And we checked in and the person claimed ownership and they had the very specific Creative Commons thing we were supposed to do, and we labeled it and everything was fine. And about 5 years later, I get a bill from Getty Photos, and it turned out that the person who had posted it on Flickr had lied. They didn't own it, and then all of the permissions were withdrawn. And we think what happened is they took it from someone else and that person got them in trouble and then went to Getty so that they could get a commission every time it was showed. And we weren't rich people or anything like that. And for using those 2 photos that we hadn't actually verified, we thought we had, but we hadn't, $2,000. $2,000. And this is separate from the ethics of we don't want to steal property from other people. So I think it's really good to be careful about using sites where there's not a really good chance this is going to happen. And I have to say that Pixabay is one of those sites where even then there's a lot of images we don't use because people will take a photo of something and their photograph might be in the public domain, but the image that they're using is not. I am not a lawyer. I do not pretend to be a lawyer anyplace. And I hear a lot of conflicting advice from people who also are not copyright lawyers about what to do or not do. So the thing I would suggest is to check in with your closest university, and you have excellent university, of course, here in Nebraska, and find who's the copyright expert. Maybe check in with the library, for example, and find out what the latest take is on how you protect yourself. And just saying that, oh, we're not doing this for profit, or everybody else is doing it, is not enough to protect you, so don't make assumptions. Second thing is, no matter what kind of system you're using, back up your originals before you start modifying them, so that you have whatever original digital photo at least in a couple of places. And of course, I know that you do daily backups, right, of everything you do, because you'll start fiddling with the original, change your mind, and then you're going to have to go back and start from scratch. And we had a wonderful designer working for us who had never designed online before. And that was one of the scary things that happened, was that um, they started deleting originals, or they would modify the original and not be able to find the original to go back to. Another thing is that even though, as I said before, it's not as much of a concern whether something is a TIFF or a GIF or whatever, you'll find out if it works with what you're working with, okay? And you can only know that by testing. You still can't make any assumptions about if the type and the art, all the stuff you're using is going to be compatible if you're trying to share it with someone else. Particularly applies to webinars, but it also might apply to information that you have embedded in your website that you want to download. And it's very common for things start to look weird, that the formatting doesn't work right, that the colors look weird, that even if it looks much bigger or much smaller, the only thing you can do is test and test and test. And when we were rolling out all the art that was related to our website, and we have, I think, 250 images on our website, we called in a whole bunch of family and friends, and we said, we want you to rip this apart. And so people dove in on all kinds of devices to see how it worked and how it didn't. And I have to say, we haven't done that recently, and we need to, because parameters change. So if I'm working with another person, particularly for a webinar, I find out what platforms they're using. I ask about what the standard is for their particular company, institution, agency. What computers do people have on their desks, in other words? And that helps guide me in my decisions of what I can do. And I don't do the flashy stuff. I don't do the stuff that's likely not to look good on somebody else. So test, 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 test. I don't try to get tricky. And when I mean tricky, there's a lot of brilliant people out there who will tell you, oh, here's the magic link number, and if you do this link number, you'll never have to embed stuff. Whatever. Oh, here's the magic cloud. And remember, the cloud is just other people's computers. There really isn't like a cloud, okay? It's other people's computers. Oh, just store everything on the cloud and everything will be fine and you'll never have to worry again. Well, we went to a new operating system a few years ago, and the first thing the operating system did was grab all of the family photos that we had on the computer, put them in the cloud where they disappeared forever. Now, maybe that won't ever happen to you, but you know, don't fool me twice. You want to keep track too of what images you use. And on Pixabay, and on most of the other similar programs I've seen, they have one nice little device, which is you can pick the stuff that's most popular, but you can also pick it in order of when it was last posted, which means that what you're going to pick is going to be fresh. And I keep track of my machine on, because I'm doing, you know, dozens, at least a couple of hundred just webinars a year, that I keep track of who I used a particular image for. And I also color code them, but that's another thing. And I can stop anytime I want. So that if I come into a really wonderful image, I know that that audience hasn't seen it 3 or 4 times. And part of the reason for this will never happen to you, is that a newspaper here in Colorado was using canned art. And in the same edition of a major daily newspaper, the advertising department used the exact same canned art of an interested looking young person who was about to buy a car for 2 different car agencies. And you hear about this online all the time of people using old art, not identifying art and things like that. That's a difficult way to underline your credibility. And there's lots of images out there. So there's a couple of images for this program that I use that I've used before for other places, but it is very, very rare that I will use the same image for the same client in a 2 or 3 year period. And that's something I just try to do stuff. And again, when we talk about formatting, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what's in the little handbook. We test, we test, we test. Okay. So in talking about stories, what we want to do is one way to think about it again is the photo is about the emotions and the narrative, what you say and what you write down to share with people online. That's where you put the facts in. And so the emotional part, and this is why we like to have images of different kinds, is where you sell what's going on. So what's the story? There's many ways you can tell a story, and this is one way. It's a little time intensive, but if you know how to use the tools, it's very good. And this, again, just working off of PowerPoint. It has a tool that you click on, and it automatically will give you a table, like we see here, a table. And you can then make the table as big or little as you want reasonably, and how many columns and how many rows and how big everything is, how um, wide and what color are the borders inside and around the image. And then you can drop in the photos. And on this particular one, what I did was find photos of animals and sunflower for the particular purpose. I measured how big that image area was within what we call the cell of the table. I cropped it, right? I mean, it's pretty mechanical. And what's nice is you can get a number that will give you the exact dimensions in inches and percentages, so you can know exactly what size you have to be and drop them in. I made sure, for example, that the penguins and the pelicans, which both had a blue background, weren't right next to each other. They were sort of touching, and made sure that the eagle was looking into the program and so on, right? Put it together, it was a great success. Now, here's the fun part. You know what this is in images? This was for a program I was doing on everyday politics and political influence in communities, and it was talking about the fact that people have very different points of views. Every one of the images represents a different formal political party. Some of them are obvious, having an American eagle, for example, or the Bull Moose Party, that was Teddy Roosevelt's party. There have been the Sunflower Party, which of course part of the Midwest. The Libertarians often use either a penguin or a porcupine, which I think is sort of fun. And when I came up with this, I had this wonderful set of array of art that I could talk over, talking about how in a pluralistic society, people deal with politics. And all it basically was, folks, was cut and paste, using simple tools that guided me through the whole thing, and I didn't have to do anything fancy. People love this. They ask for copies of it. Another thing to think about when you think about a story is you can have the same basic image, but because the artist who created it has dealt with it differently, just like we talked about the kittens early on, you can make some decisions about how you want to apply it. So here's an old camera, and I don't even know how old it is, from the 20s or 30s. And it's high contrast, as you can see, and all the color's been taken out of it, except instead of being black and white, it's kind of an old gold with the black. And I look at this and I think, what does this make me think of? It makes me think of ghosts. It makes me think of the past. Kind of, for me at least, it's a little bit sad. So maybe if I was using this photo, I would want to tell people about the lost technologies that we have in society, and remembering that this was once state of the art, right? This is once the bleeding edge of technology, and now it's gone. Now it's gone. So that may be how this photo might strike me emotionally and how I might choose to use it. On the other hand, here's almost the same camera. I couldn't find exactly the same camera, but look at how well oiled the leather is. And even though it's a little bit worn in places, everything is shiny and bright and new. And notice also that it's got some photographs that are there, and the photographs are older photographs, and there's a little leather case there, and it's on a pretty table, and it's bright, and it makes you think maybe there is a place for old technologies. Maybe this camera is still in use, and you can, by the way, find film for cameras like this. I have a cousin who's a professional photographer in California. She collects old cameras like this, and she said, yeah, there's people out there, you know, any kind of camera you can imagine, you probably can find the film to be in it. This is a totally different feeling to it, even though in effect it's the same image that we're looking at. I'm going to back up here so you can see these two images and how this one is so different from this one. So it's, again, it's sort of thinking about what's the story? What's the story about this? So I collect art before I need it. I'm such a nerd. One of my favorite things to do in the evening after dinner is spend about a half an hour going through Pixabay and Unsplash and whatever I can find out there that's free and in the public domain, so I can do programs for people without having to pay extra money for it. I try to keep my prices low so they're affordable to my audience, and I will build file folders of photos on boats, for example, or mountains, or kittens, or goats, or 19th century architecture. Whatever are images I come back from, I love images of windows and doors to tell a story. So I will do that, and then when I actually have a program, I have that in place. Now, before electricity, when I was writing magazine articles and helping to manage publications many years ago, we would do this with clippings and file folders. We would look for stories that were interesting, and we'd have a clipping file, and then we could go into the clipping files about, oh, food or business or schools, whatever, and find 20 or 30 pieces of text for inspiration. And you can do the same thing. My husband's always impressed when he looks how I have things organized. Takes a little bit of time. Boy, does it pay off when I'm in a hurry. Really does. So here's some of the aspects of what do we mean by telling a story. If we're looking at an image, is there a crisis and resolution to the image? Like two little animals boxing. What is the impact of the image? And again, we want to make sure that the impact is not stronger than the story we're trying to tell. We want to have good people in it. So if we are using human beings, we want them smiling and happy. Please be so careful about using people who don't look happy. And we're going to talk about why I don't hardly use people anymore, because it's easy to interpret them the wrong way. Whatever kind of image I use, and one way I get around the live people images, I use sculpture. I like sculpture pieces a lot. Are they engaging, right? When people look at it, I know I have a win. Even when I'm talking about a serious subject, if I know I can get the viewer to smile, right? That's the best emotional engagement that you can get, in my opinion. And yeah, cute kids and animals. And yes, I sometimes present to big, important corporations and I use cute kids and animals rather than those awful corporate photos that look like 1950s Sears underwear ads. I'm sorry. I, I warned you, subjective. Maybe somebody overcoming a hardship, like somebody being able to leap a tall building, or people mountaineering, or people doing some sort of extreme sport of some kind. Also, as I said before, I want the audience to be able to relate to the story in one way or another. And I usually do this by thinking about who they are and what they're going to see in an image that's going to tie them in some way or another. Is it going to make them smile? Will they be able to relate to what's going on? And yes, I do use a lot of humor. I do a lot of humor. Just so you know, one of my specialties is conflict management. And my husband loves to say that when he comes to pick me up from a conference, he'll wander through the hall of the conference center and he'll listen for people laughing. And he knows if he hears a lot of people laughing, it might be the training room where I'm teaching people about conflict management, because I get people to laugh as a way of engaging them and lowering their barriers to new information as well. So I've kind of alluded this before, but I have found out the hard way that when you use faces, and human faces are supposed to be the most engaging thing you can use in a photo, and you'll see it and hear it, and I don't disagree. But the problem is that people bring their own interpretation, their own baggage. A friend of mine who taught in South America for many years, one of the things, she taught English in Brazil. And she said she had this lady who was learning colloquial in English, and she had this great line where the woman said, you know, I brought a lot of luggage to the situation. So a joke between my friend Debbie and me as well. Do you have a lot of luggage today? So people bring a lot of luggage when they're looking at your photo. And it's sort of dismaying where they see something based on their past simply because the photo you have looks like their Uncle Harry and they hated their Uncle Harry, or they have a philosophical interpretation of what you're doing or how you're doing it, which is why I have copped out a long time ago, and most of the time in most situation, unless it's a crowd photo of some kind with lots of different ethnicity and diversity in it, and age, socioeconomic status and stuff, like you'd see at a ballpark, something like that. I stick with animals and sculptures on this. So we're going to look a little bit now at the issue of tweaking a photo. And I'd like you to look at the photo at the left, and I purposely picked a photo I liked that I would be willing to use without any cropping or change in color at all, and see the difference when I just moved in a little closer. When I cropped this photo, I tried to make sure that I didn't interrupt the lovely rhythm this photo has in terms of color and form, as the park benches and the main tree are kind of encircled by those bushes and by that stone wall. About where could I cut it out? Like for the bush on the left, when I decided to trim it, I trimmed it right under the bush, so the bush itself was held intact. Same thing when I looked in the right. I didn't mind interrupting that little kind of yellowish green bush that's in the middle right-hand corner of the photo. But if you look at the right-hand side where I did crop the photo, yes, I did crop it a little bit, but I kept that main rhythm. But if you look at the two of them, you'll realize that it's kind of like in the one on the right, I brought the viewer a step closer, and I also made it more evident that the emphasis was not necessarily on the pretty background, but on the uh, benches themselves. And I just tweaked it a little, Both of those photos are perfectly satisfactory to me, but two different images. I think that's important, two different images. So here are some reasons that you might have to tweak things, and then we're going to take you through one example. You might have to, and by the way, people I know who are formally trained commercial artists are horrified at the fact that I'm so willing to crop and lighten and do all kinds of adjustments. I don't care. Sometimes there's a downside to hiring people who are formally trained fine artists, because they will look more at the aesthetic rather than the context of what you're trying to show other people. So I might want to crop, I might want to lighten, I might want to adjust the contrast, I might want to give it a little more color, and I might want to colorize it because I think it needs punch. So let me show you just some little things that I did. So for example, the first thing, I went out and I tried to find kind of an ugly photo. And that's the original photo on the left. It was taken someplace in Iran in the countryside. Doesn't have much of a color palette. It's kind of gray, isn't it? And your eye isn't really sure what it's supposed to look at. Is it supposed to look at the mountain range in the back? Is it supposed to look at the little houses on the hill? Is it supposed to look at the path up there? What I found is my eye wasn't staying at the bottom with the building. It was jumping up. It was almost like, okay, what am I supposed to be looking at? So there's, from my point of view, if this is to illustrate something, we can make it better. We can make it better. So the first thing I did is I cropped it. And I cropped it so we could focus on the building, which was more interesting in my mind than the building and the countryside, unless, again, there was a specific message I wanted to make. So we can see that this is pretty dilapidated, isn't it? Pretty dilapidated. Okay, we could stop there, but what if we do a little bit more? So all I did was lighten it. I'm going to go back and forth, lighten it, and put a little spotlight on it. And if you can see the one on the left, lightening it really did improve it. It gets more information to the eye. You can see the detail a little bit more, but it really does bring out the detail. It's almost like a cloud cover. Again, I'm going to go back and forth. The cloud cover suddenly was removed over the place, and there's more information that you can see that might be more engaging. And again, a tool that is inherent in PowerPoint, a tool that you can find in lots of different ways. We don't do it too much because we start losing details. So you got to play with it a little bit, how much to lighten, to bring out the detail without making it kind of flat and monochromatic. And again, play, 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 you get to learn this stuff. But you know what? I'm still not done. I need a little punch to it. So this punch that you see, again, was simply saying intensify the colors that are already inherent in the information in the photo, that the photo in effect already knows about what's green and what's blue. Look at what it does, by the way, to the color in the sky. I did not say make it blue. I just said intensify the colors that are already there. I didn't say make it green. It just intensified the colors that were already there. And you could see that it almost looks phony on the right-hand side now, very intense. But if you had seen that photo first, what you would have seen was a building that looks like it was made of some kind of metal in a green field with a lot of rust, and the details really being poked out. And if you go back again, back here, you see that this is pretty dark and gray, and there's not that much contrast between what the building looks like and the surrounding area. But lightening it and then intensifying the colors, now there's a real contrast, and that building pops up. So not the best photo in the world, but maybe now it's a little bit of a better photo. And what if we need to do something dramatic, right? What if we need to do something really dramatic? Oh, let me go here. I forgot I did this. This is sort of nice. This shows you the original. This shows you what we did with it. And what we might want to do is colorize it. And this is simply using the tools that are in your PowerPoint or whatever to make that photo a black and white photo. And what's cool is picking a color that was already part of the palette that was inherent in whatever program or whatever you were using, and then lightening it a bit. So it may be that this is the right way to give the message that you wanted people to give. So what I'd like to do quickly is to go over some of the resources that I was able to do. Before that, I just want to mention one little thing. Sometimes an image is better than a photo, particularly if you're working with nature. It's been known for centuries, or at least since the introduction of the photograph, that a photograph gives you a lot of information, but if you want that detail, finding a good botanical artist works very well. So there are times where I'm trying to give a message and I find that, yes, an image is better than a photograph. And if you look up botanical illustration, you'll find a ton of information out there. Okay, so here's some resources. One of the things I did was include resources, not just on photos, but things like making infographics, because then you can use type and color, making your own comics, storyboarding, which is another way of talking about that art gallery idea that we had before. And of course, my favorite free public domain site, which is pixabay.com. And then here are some books that I think are good. And these are all about storytelling with word and images outside of one particular profession. It's about what people use in companies and agencies and in sales, in causes of different kinds. So I thought you would enjoy that. The best place to educate your eye, where you're going to find the best photos in the world, is the magazine called Communication Arts. And they have a website with a ton of great information and images. And the best design instruction books for people who don't know about design were written by a woman named Robin Williams. Some of them are out of print, but if you go to her website at ratz.com, you'll find links to books that are both in print and out of print, particularly having to do with brochures and art and online communication. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to the powers that be at DoSpace and see if any questions came in during our program.
Yes, so the first question is from Fanny Perez, and they ask, is Flickr not so reliable resource?
Okay, and I'm having, I've got a little distortion here. Could you do that? And I'm hard of hearing. Could you say that a little closer, a little slower, please? Because I missed hearing what you were saying.
Okay. First question is from Fanny Perez, and they ask, is Flickr not so reliable resource?
Is what, and again, I missed,
Flickr.
who's, Flickr?
Yeah.
Is Flickr? No. Flickr was the one that ended up costing us a couple of $1,000s. I would say if you're going to use something on Flickr, yes, obey the rules, but I would say if it's important to you, contact the person who posted it yourself to ensure that they actually do own it and know it. But we were just so badly burned using Flickr, we don't anymore. So that's just out of personal experience. Someone else might have a different one, and we successfully used it for 4 years without a problem. So that's just personal experience.
Okay, and then the next question is actually for me. Is Google Photos using the commercial free license filter a reliable resource?
No. And part of the reason for that is how things are labeled. For example, when I look at Google, I will do it to find certain images and I'll use the filters that it has there. But then when I use that step where you get closer in and you start looking at all the labels, you might see that that particular piece of art appears in 20 or 30 different magazines. And the people who say it's okay to use it are somebody in Europe who used it 10 years ago who didn't feel obligated to follow the United States copyright laws. And so I use it as a guideline, but then regardless, if I really find an image I like, I have to do due diligence beforehand. You know where I've used it is for historical photos of people who may have, and the photo might have been taken in the 1930s or 40s or early 50s, kind of waffling where it is, and then I see who else has posted it and what they've done with it. And I will cheat once in a while because I know that enough people have published it without attribution that it is now in the public domain. But I'll tell you, the worst people to deal with are the people who are the estates of dead famous people. They're the ones who are going to go after you, even if the thing is like 1 year away of being in the public domain.
Okay. If anyone else has questions, they can still type them in chat. We got one last posted question, and that's also for me. It is unrelated to this content. And I'm noting that you are very organized and well-paced in teaching webinars. Do you have any tips on hosting webinars and online content?
Well, a couple things I would say is remember that you have a live audience in front of you. I just saw something posted this morning on Facebook from some buddies who also do training, and they were complaining about people who use a monotone. And I think, again, my experience with a degree in theater and working in radio is that it's like I'm talking to you, and I have to be a little more excited and a little more bigger than if I'm just sort of talking to you and me close, and we don't want anyone else at the restaurant to hear what we're saying. And I think that's how some people present about things. And I think the second thing is you don't have to be fancy, but you have to be legible. And I worked with this incredible designer. I still adore her. But when we first started working together, she would create slides for my programs that were beautiful, and you couldn't read them. Right? It would be gray type on slightly darker grayer type that was like a little 4-point high, and it looked like way cool, but it didn't help if people couldn't actually see the information on the slide. So those are two ideas to think about.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions, but I have a comment from Fanny. I really enjoyed your narration. I think I did not need pics, just your voice. Thanks. It was very pleasant, natural gift.
Well, thank you. And it's practice, folks. Practice, practice, practice. Everything I do out loud. And preparing for your program today, I probably went through the slides 4 times to time them out and in hopes that you would have a good experience in the time we had.
Okay, that is all the questions.
Very good.
So everyone, I just posted an email. As I remember, Pat, you said that you do free consultations. Can you
Yes.
talk about that a little bit?
It's just that if you call or email me, and the company is called Pattern Research in Denver, and you can contact me at pat@patternresearch.com, and pretty easy to find online. And if you had a question or needed some more information related to today's program, we'd be very happy to help you online, or we might even be able to have a chat, you know?
Thank you for everyone coming. That is time for today. We have another webinar coming at 6:30. We'll learn a little bit about phone photography. But thank you very much for Pat joining us and giving this wonderful webinar. I hope everyone has a good evening. And again, if you have any more questions for Pat, you can email pat@patternresearch.com. If you got any questions for DoSpace, you can email hello@dospace.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.